Okay?
Yeah.
I wanted to say about the effect of books that he was distributing. Although one would, if one is sitting in LA, question, what the effect is going to be of this. But as far as the books, first of all, were very lousy translations. People could hardly understand what they really were supposed to be saying. But still, there were, I got reports from people all over that had contacted somebody who had contacted somebody who had a book. You see, because the way it went with books at that time is that if you had a book, a list was created on paper, and whoever had the book would sign the list, and it would be passed around and to the next person on the list. That was the way you had to reserve a book for like maybe a year in advance to get a book. And these books were just going all around on these lists. Even it was such a horrible translation, and everybody was like scratching their heads trying to figure out sometimes what was just said, because they couldn't understand the Russian. He didn't speak good Russian. I mean, he did his best, but it just didn't work, really. But still, people were just signing up for that book, and all those books were just going everywhere. And I was telling him that, the effect, I mean, it took me about a year and a half after he started to figure out that actually these things were having such an impact. So I was telling him to encourage him, but it was just an amazing work. It's like even these like insignificant, so-called insignificant things of putting a book in a library somewhere in somebody's ship. Actually, these things had enormous impact for what was going on over there. So one should, I've heard that people say that when you go to the other side, they use that terminology. It's the little things that count more than the big things. So even though there were these little, so-called little things, they had enormous impact. So this was an example of that.
Who translated it?
That first book was translated by Dorcas because he was Hungarian and he had, all the Eastern Europeans, they learned Russian in school, but his Russian wasn't very good. As soon as I had the capacity, immediately I replaced every of these translations and started other translations with people who actually knew English a lot better. I mean Russian a lot better. They were Russians and they knew English very well also. So it was translated directly from the English. But still, it was the only one there, and it just had its effect. And it was, I mean, me personally, I had these like moments of like, but he's over there in LA. I kept telling him this. I said, why don't you come over here? For me, it was like he was really an ally in the sense of spirit. Because although I had managed to pick up people to go with me on trips like Gururanga, he was just somebody who I just grabbed and said, let's go, and he felt like, let's have an experience. Suchandra, he was also doing his own preaching in Poland and other places, and then there were other groups. We had like 4 or 5 groups. But he was like a comrade in spirit, if you can call it, using that word comrade. And it was like somebody who actually felt deeply about it. And I would say he might have felt more deeply about it than me, but at least equally, I don't know. And I was always saying that, you're over there in LA and you're putting these books on ships and stuff, but how many more ships are there here? How many more people are there here? You're right next to it. You're a very short distance away. Communication from Sweden to Russian is certainly a lot easier than from... So I kept trying to convince him to come over to Sweden, and finally he went over to England. And then from England I managed to get him to go to Sweden. And that's when he did this whole thing about changing the Gorbachev's opinion of stuff. But I just wanted to say that was the way I felt his work had impact. But anyway, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, one other thing you reminded me when you talked about putting these books, I would also go, when I go to these terminals, these docks, I would look around, and this continued even when we did move to Europe, that I would look and see that here were big pallets of boxes of something going to St. Petersburg, going to Moscow, and I would take with me to the docks a little X-Acto knife and my book bag full of Russian books. And I would like make little slits in the plastic shrink wrapping and throw in 2, 3 books, thinking, okay, when these guys, they lift them up in the pallet, they go, they open it up. In Moscow, it's like, and they would, keep them. And that's, and so many things were done like that with devotees.
Did you ever get any feedback that says something actually happened, that someone...
No, I was getting the feedback and I was sending it to him.
Only in those kinds of ways. La Bangalatika, the original La Bangalatika, she would go to India, come back and forth between India and America, Los Angeles and India, and she would, I would load her up with books. And later on, as things developed, I mean, we printed the Russian Bhagavad Gita in Bombay. So we had 10,000 Bhagavad Gitas in Bombay. So she'd pick up a supply there, and she would pass through in transit in Moscow. And she'd go into the bathroom, and she'd leave a copy in the bathroom. She would, be just sitting in the transit lounge, and she would put one under the newspaper that was sitting there. And she would then sit back and watch. And she said, so often she'd see somebody walk out of the bathroom, one ladies' bathroom, walk out of the bathroom, look like, and then take off, and you could tell. I mean, who does that when you just come out of the bathroom, But because they found the book when they went into the bathroom, they had it, they found it, and they hid it, and they took off. So all these little things, I mean, I think did add up. When we lived in Sweden, and when we would go back and forth into Germany, to Denmark, to Sweden, to Finland, I would find along the road, I'd see along the road these 40-foot tractor trailers. And they were with the Transavto Soviet trucking lines. So they'd be driving down the road. So sometimes I'd be alone, sometimes I'd be with Dumrakesh, sometimes I'd be with my family. And so I would pass them. And then I'd get back in front of them. I'd put on my flashing emergency lights. I'd put my arm out the window and go like this. And the next thing you know, you see the truck slow up and pull over. And here he is. I mean, he's a Soviet in a foreign country. He gets pulled over. And, I'd come out and I'd say, in my very broken, as the same way you were talking about the books and the broken Russian translation, in my broken Russian speaking, I'd say to them, I'd say hello, and I'd ask them, if they ever saw the movie Indiyskiy Yogi Kto Oni. It was a Soviet movie made about, it says, Indian yogis, who are they? And it was all, yogis and their fingernails growing through their hands from years and years of meditation and all these things. So, I mean, I'd pull them over, I'd run back, and they were like, really, they're afraid. They rolled down the window. And then the guy who, pulls them over says, hey, did you ever see this movie, Indian Yogis, who are they? And the guy looks at me and goes, whew. I mean, more often than not, they'd be, oh my God, thank God it's only you, asking that. So we started, rather than, you just exceeded the speed limit, or you just drove past someplace you're not supposed to because it's controlled. So there was sort of a whole conversation, asking if they're interested in yoga, meditation, Indian philosophy. I give them a couple books. And by the time, I said goodbye to them, they were in ecstasy because they just, they were so afraid they just did something wrong and were going to get locked up or fined or deported or something, or fired. So, all these different kind of, and I got feedback definitely from those kind of situations, from truck drivers receiving books. And back to what you were saying about the translations, we published.
Let me explain how I got the books in to do the translations. When I went in with Guru Granga in my car, because I had been going to Eastern Europe all the time, bringing books, smuggling in books, and we had learned all kinds of clever ways of smuggling in books. We had even done an amazing book drop in East Germany behind the lines, and it was just, these are other stories which are just out of this world, but you only want to know about Russian. So I brought in with me the practically...
Well, that's not exactly true. This is the Soviet Union, which included Eastern Europe, if I understand.
No.
Not technically, no.
No, not technically.
Soviet Union is...
Okay, no. Actually, this is about how Krishna consciousness invaded the Iron Curtain. So the Iron Curtain it does include...
But there's I can
That's
go
a whole
on for
other...
days and days and days of that. But
Okay.
if you want, I can give you one story about bringing the books into East Germany.
Sure.
Just for fun, because this is actually quite a fun story. I can tell you two stories. First one in Poland. There's hundreds of stories, but this one's very interesting. I used to hide in my little van. All I had was a kitchen cabinet, so I used to hide books behind the spices. And I would pack 2 or 3 books as if it was another wall. But I couldn't cover them over. I used to push the spices back in there. And one day, of course, they used to tear us apart. So this Polish guy tears us apart. And then he pulls out like the oregano. And he's looking directly at an Upanishad. He's looking directly at a Vishnu face behind the oregano. But he thinks the oregano is something else than oregano. So he looks at us and he's saying, what is this? And we say, it's oregano. I went with sumahat. I don't know if you know sumahat. And he was going, uh-huh. Are you sure this is oregano? He said, yeah, this is oregano. Are you sure? Because I'm going to smell this and you're going to go to jail for a long time. And we say, definitely it's oregano. And then he's making this whole drama, and in the meantime our car has got all these people around it. And he pulls off the thing and then he's looking at us like this and he's like, oh. And he puts it back and then he puts it directly right in front of the Vishnu. And then he takes out another one. I don't know what spice that was. And he's like checking all the spices like this. He's so absorbed in the spices, think we're smuggling drugs. He doesn't see the books which are right behind the spices. So it was like so wild, that particular. So then I got this idea. Let's dump a whole van full of books into Eastern Germany, because I had these two contacts in Eastern Germany. One guy, I think he became initiated as Balaram or something like that. He was an East German, and he lived in Leipzig. So from Berlin to Frankfurt, you could go transit down on the road that would go to Leipzig, to Munich. You go down the road to Leipzig, and then you go also Munich, or you can go to Frankfurt this way, you go to Munich that way. And you had to go through East German territory to drive. So I came up with the idea that we go in two vans. One van goes transit, but it's packed with books. I go in entry, for a one-day entry into Leipzig, but I'm empty. I have nothing in it. We meet at the first rest area, whatever it is, because they always changed the rest areas on the Autobahn because they didn't want people to do this. So they always changed which ones were open. They had played musical rest areas. So we said, whatever the first one is, we'll meet there. We'll switch the books from the transit van to the entry van, because once you're in, you're in. And they very rarely checked after that, especially if they didn't see anything. And I would bring the books to this guy's house, and then you guys would transit out. And since they didn't register, you just transit. It has none of their business. There was the agreement. You just transit straight through and you go out. Okay, seems to be a foolproof plan. However, they go in transit, I go in entry. We see each other as we're going in the different ones. Now the guy comes in my van and he says, you're going into Leipzig. I said, yeah. He says, but you have nothing in this van. And I go, I forgot to bring something. I only had like an overnight kit basically and a couple of chudders to sleep on, and it was like nothing in there. And it's this big empty van. So he's going, what is this? There's nothing here. I said, I'm only going to just go to a camping place and then I'm going out. I just didn't want to drive all that way in one night. And so I was speaking to him in German. Somehow he accepted it, but the way they are always suspicious. So then we meet at the rest area. Our two vans are parked next to each other on this side, towards the Autobahn. Just as we get out, two police cars pull up. So I've got Gorka Shore and Tapanidi in the other van, and me in my van. And you're not supposed to connect, because one is transit, one is entry. So I said, let's take apples, because they're shaking in their pants. They're just shaking like a leaf, because this means like heavy 15 years prison minimum. I said, just take an apple and let's go over to the table and eat it. So we all went over to the table, we're eating apples, and I said, don't look at the police, don't look anywhere, just look at me and let's just keep eating these apples. So we're eating the apples and they're looking for a long time. They're looking at the vans, they go over, they look in the van, they come back, they're going in their car, they're sitting there, and then they drive away. And then I said, quick, let's do everything now. So like complete madmen. Now these boxes, we're talking about boxes that weighed at least 75 kilos each, if not more, maybe 80 kilos. I have no idea. These are huge banana boxes and bigger, full of very heavy hardbound books. So we are throwing them practically from one van to the other. Just throwing them. We're so crazy, insane with fear. So then we just slam the door. They drive out first. And then I follow. I go up maybe 2 kilometers. And on the right side of the road, there's this policeman with a walkie-talkie. And he's talking in the walkie-talkie. He sees me, and he starts to wave me down. Now, I'm in East Germany as an entry. I'm in their system. I'm in their thing. I've got a van full, and I mean full. We're talking here about maybe 30 boxes of books. And this means I am hung for as long as I can think of. And so I don't look at the guy. I see him out of the corner. I don't look at him. I don't acknowledge his existence. I just drive through with the same exact speed, and then I get over a little hill and I just floor it as fast as I can. I had one of the Hanomag Henschel versions of a Mercedes van, which had a gas engine, and I just floored it and just tore off down the road. Now I know that I'm full of books. I'm in a van. This guy's got a police car. He's going to catch me. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I don't know. Just then, thank God, it's now, first of all, we're talking about the middle of the summer. It is at least 35 degrees out. It is so hot. It is steaming hot. A thunderstorm breaks out. The most ferocious thunderstorm anyone could ever imagine. It was as if Niagara Falls incarnated on the German autoroute. Just thunderstorm. And all the water hitting the hot pavement made smoke come flying off of the pavement. So I'm just with my foot to the floor, screaming down the Autobahn, not caring about the slick, not caring about the rain, not caring about I can't see anything. And the German Autobahn in those days was very, in the DDR, it was very empty. I'm just screaming down that road. And I think because of this incredible storm and the smoke, they lost me. And the first exit, the one I wasn't supposed to go off on, because you got to go off at the exact exit, I went off at the first exit, just screamed off of that, still full speed, and just made the first turn on any road I could turn. And then I just kept driving and driving and driving. I finally managed, without a map, to find Leipzig on back roads all the way in a German van, because I know they're on the autoroute waiting for me. So I have no idea where I'm going. I'm totally exposed. I'm in a place I'm not supposed to be, in a van that's obviously a West German van, full of books. And I finally just drive and nobody stopped me. I finally made it to Leipzig. I finally find this guy's house. And it's about 9:30 at night. The only place I can park is underneath the street lamp, because that's all there was. So I go and I throw rocks on his window. His window is up above my head about so high. That's the bottom of his window. So I'm throwing rocks because he thought I wasn't going to come. I was supposed to be there at like 3 in the afternoon, because it took me something like 6 hours to make it to Leipzig from when this happened, or 7 hours. I don't remember, a long time. So I throw rocks, and then he opens the window and he says, "Why are you so late? And why are you parked under the street light?" I said, "Look, I can't explain. I've got a lot of books. You've just got to take them." He said, "Take them? I've got one room. My landlady lives underneath." And I say, "Don't question. Just hide them somehow or another. I'm going to give you a couple of boxes of books." I didn't tell him how many, because we were supposed to go somewhere else with the books. He said, "All right." So then I open the back. It's in full view of the whole neighborhood. I'm just bringing over these boxes. Now, my adrenaline is probably pumped up about as much as a human being's adrenaline can ever possibly be. And I'm carrying these books as if they were not heavy. And I was, in those days, quite skinny. And I just picked that box and I threw it through his window. Now, he thought this was light because it's flying through my window. So he's there to catch it. It hits him in the chest. And he goes flat across the floor, sliding all the way with this box of book on his chest. And I hear, oh. And I said, there's more coming, get up. And I hear, oh, I run back, and I'm throwing these boxes through his window. And this time he figures out how to catch them at the ledge, and then he backs them all up and he says, my whole room is full of books. I said, you figure it out, I'm out of here. He said, how do I contact you? I said, don't contact me, don't know me, have nothing to do with me. And then I drive to the camping place. Now the camping place is outside of Leipzig the other way, so I arrive there. By this time, I arrive at this camping place around 1 o'clock at night, maybe 1:15 at night. Very unusual. They're like suspicious from the start. What are you doing coming so late? I said, I had a breakdown. I couldn't make it. So then I come in, they put me in some place. So when I'm sleeping, it is like I go into a coma. I am so tired from having thrown 2 times all these books and driven and having this whole hysteria, and I don't handle stress at all very well anyway, and I'm just completely dead to the world. So at 5 o'clock, I hear, bam, 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 bam. I go, ah! I wake up like that, ah! And then I check, and then I go, yes? And they go, is this you? I said, yes. They said, there's a phone call for you. I said, what? They said, there's a phone call for you. It's from West Germany. I'm like, what phone call? And I drag myself out of the car. I'm, in a gumchaw, and I go get the phone call. And it's Suchandra. And he says that Prabhupada wanted me to go to London right away and meet him there to be his secretary because Pushta Krishna was leaving or something like that, and he had no secretary. He needed me there the next day. And I went, you have no idea how good that sounds. You have no idea how good it was that you called. He said, why? I said, I'll tell you later. Boom. And then I got in the car and drove out, and there was no problem. Because it was totally empty. When I got to the border, they all jump in the car, right? And they look around, there's nothing there. And then they just look at me, and then I just went right out. So that was my first super heavy experience with. Anyway, so we're driving into Russia. So, okay, we have these, there's stories about Romania and stuff, which will just blow your mind, but we'll skip that now. But so we're driving into St. Petersburg, and I'm doing again the same thing, which means you just leave a book here, you leave them there. Better you leave them just laying around here and there, not like you're trying to hide them, because we know they're going to tear our car apart. Every tiny little bit they're going to tear apart. They even take off the gas tank sometimes. So we just decided to just leave the books everywhere. They're just here and there everywhere. So then they picked up every one of these books. I had the whole Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Krishna books, I had every book that was at that time published. I had the whole thing. No CCs. And they were just laying around everywhere. So they were just
laying around one place, or
no, like and we had these tapes as decoys. That was going out. Because when we went, anyway, because of this, when we went out, we got really ripped apart. But anyway, that's another thing. So they were just laying like 2 on the front seat here, and 1 on the thing here, and 2 in the glove compartment there, and in our suitcases 2 here, and 2 there in the other suitcase, and 2 in where the bed thing was, and then under the seat was 1 or 2, or they were just books laying around. So then the guy brings in the whole stack. They had collected the whole stack. They had written down every single title it was. And they said, what are these? And we said, we read books. What else are we going to do here? We're going to be staying in camping place. We got to read these books. We're going to be a lot of times at night and nothing to do. We don't go out to clubs and stuff. We're not that kind of people. And then he looks at me and he says, so you're religious people, aren't you? I said, yeah, we believe in God. Is there a problem with that? And they said, oh, you think there's a God, huh? And then he starts having a philosophical conversation with me. And I'm straight out open, talking as if I was like a Christian or anybody who believed in God. I just didn't hide anything. I said, no, it's just because I wanted to get the books in. So I had to somehow justify the reason why these books were here. I said, sure, I'm a very religious person. You don't allow religious people to visit your country? I was saying like that. And so they let us go. And then I brought all those books in, and I gave all the books to, in Moscow, to whoever it was, I forgot now, and they had all the books to translate from. So that's how we got the first batch of books in like that for them. But when we left, they knew that we had all these books. And they knew we had materials. So for some reason that I can't understand, they weren't exactly sure what we had. So what we did is we bought books that were some kind of acceptable Orthodox or something books. We had them in the car. Because they didn't exactly say which books to that border person in Minsk. And anyway, they were different totally. By the time we left from Belarus, I think it was, or something like that. The last country over, that's where we got ripped apart. And then we also had cassettes. I had brought in cassettes of all the bhajans and stuff, and so that they could learn the melodies and all these things, and they were also there. So I had bought cassettes of various music, just plain music, and so we replaced every cassette with this kind of music, and we left all the cassettes there. So then they were playing all these cassettes, they were reading all the books, and they took the bolts off of every part of the trunk. The gas tank was off, the muffler was off. They took the car apart totally, mechanically. They had their mechanics taking the car apart. It took about 8 hours. We were sitting at the border. They didn't let us go. We arrived like 8 and 9 in the morning. They didn't let us go until like 7 or 8 at night, or 6 or 7 or 8 at night. And then when we finally made it into Poland, we thought Poland was a heavenly country. I mean, it's so weird, but when we drove over that border after this experience, we felt that Poland was heaven compared to Russia. It was like, we felt like liberated. It was, so that's, anyway, I thought I'd just tell those books.
So should we go back to the book fair? No? Did you
Sure.
So you were making arrangements to go to this book fair.
But talking about these rough, or very rough translations, we had managed to print, excuse me.
Let me tell you as soon as he's finished here about the way the translations took place, and about the way the first films, the microfilms came out, and so that we could do publications and everything, and how the book was first published in little tiny versions and smuggled all over Russia. But anyway.
The second book that was translated and published was Sri Sopanishad. And that, I gave it the title in English, The Little Book of Indian Thought. So it was translated again by somebody who, I think it was Haranya Mahashaya, translated. He was a Finnish devotee with Russian ancestry, lived in Helsinki. His Russian was passable, but certainly not of translation quality. So he translated some, again, I think the Small Book of Indian Thought into Kanishka Indiskogo Mezhelenia, which was like horrible Russian. Horrible Russian. You give it to people and they look at it and go, like, what's this? You know, terrible Russian. But it had its effect. The effect was still there, and made so many people aware and brought so many people to Krishna consciousness. So back to the Moscow Book Fair, I packed up, they have so many rules and regulations where that you ship things in advance, they're recorded by customs, you have bill of ladings and invoices and all these things, and then that way they were controlling what came in and to guarantee that the stuff went back out, you re-exported it. So you could either, the books you bring in, you could either re-export them or you could donate them to a Soviet institution, but you could not give them out to people. So what I did is I got from Bombay BBT a copy of one of their purchase orders. And it was Bhaktivedanta Book Trust purchase order, and all the books were listed because the library party had been going around India at that time, so they had this order form. So I took that, I duplicated that, made photocopies, and took it to Moscow with me. So what we did is we had a complete set of all Prabhupada's books there, and we took orders for Prabhupada's books from people who were interested. So we had people giving payment in rubles, paying in advance, getting their addresses, and we took orders for the books. And they had complete faith and trust in us that we would ship them the books. And they were giving a lot of money. It was a lot of money they were paying. So we took these orders, and we got, I don't remember how many, but orders for hundreds of books. And what we were doing is, I had this idea when I arrived in Moscow. I said, we got to take as much advantage of this opportunity as possible. So we said, okay, we have Prabhupada's books. We're going to take orders. We're going to have this tape playing so everybody hears Hare Krishna mantra, and we're going to distribute prasadam. So I said, okay, what's potentially available in the store? And I said, can we get powdered milk, butter, and sugar? And they said, yes, it's hit and miss, but we'll try and get whatever we can. So the devotees went out the first day, and they bought all they could of butter, powdered sugar, and powdered milk. And they started making Simply Wonderfuls. And they made them like, a little bit bigger than maybe 3 or 4 times the size of the head of an eraser, of a pencil. So they brought them in. They brought them the next day in these little bags that the powdered milk and the powdered sugar came in. These little brown, look like in this day and age, recycled bags, not fancy writing or fancy paper material, but really rough Eastern European quality. So we would put them out on a tray. We had a little sign, and as people came by, they either saw the sign, or we would say, Indiski sladasi, ugashedi, Indian sweets, help yourself. And so they would take one, and we watched them, so they only took one. And I mean, people were flocking from all over the hall where the exhibit was going on, because they heard from people that there were these wonderful books and these wonderful sweets. So people were coming, and we couldn't keep them supplied fast enough. And I think the book fair took maybe 6 days, if I recall correctly. And so at night, the devotees would take the money that we collected for the book orders. They would go to the store in the evening, buy the ingredients, and they would stay up all night, make a crew. There were like a dozen devotees who would make Simply Wonderfuls and roll them all night. And I would see the devotees would come in the morning, and some of them would have blisters on their fingers from all night long rolling Simply Wonderfuls, just thousands and thousands of Simply Wonderfuls. And I calculated, based on what they had said, that we distributed probably more than 26,000 Simply Wonderfuls during the course of the Moscow Book Fair. And it was amazing, because when you would run out of the day's supply, or until a new batch came, there would be crumbs, and people would come and they were disappointed. So what we were doing, we were tearing up little pieces of paper and making little pieces of paper this big. We were scooping crumbs up from the Simply Wonderfuls and I have pictures, handing these little papers with crumbs on it, and the people were dropping the crumbs in their mouth. It was like distributing Mahaprasadam in India. It was like they so much wanted it. They were so appreciative, even for crumbs. I mean, and this is like unheard of. I mean, you're in Moscow. These are professors, and to a great extent, more intelligent class of people coming to look at books, and especially Indian books. And they were just, licking up and sucking up crumbs off of Simply Wonderfuls, off these little pieces, little slips of paper. And when we first started distributing prasadam, immediately these 3 guys, and you could always tell the KGB officer, especially the higher ranking KGB officers, they were the only people in the country who wore 3-piece suits.
And never smiled.
Never smiled. They were straight, clean cut, you'd say Mr. America, Mr. Russia. Straight, clean cut, straight face, chiseled jaw, and they'd come with a 3-piece suit on. And they could tell and found out that I was the foreigner, the guy who was the registered agent of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust there. And they were demanding, you have to stop this. You can't be passing out this food. I said, why not? I said, because it could be poison. I said, it's not poison. I said, I'm not poisoning anybody at the Moscow Book Fair. I I mean, you want to try it yourself? And they said, yeah. So they tried the Simply Wonderful, and they liked it, and they saw it wasn't poison, and they said, okay, no problem, you can continue. So they allowed it to go on for the remaining days. The first day, you were supposed to, one of the ways they controlled you is that you had to have an official interest-provided interpreter to have contact with the Russians, the Soviets who didn't speak English. So they said, okay, we have to give you and of course you have to pay for that interpreter. We have to give you an interpreter. I said, you know what, I don't want, I have my own interpreter. So, well, you're not allowed to have your own interpreter. I said, well, you know what, with the technical nature of these books, a regular interpreter is not going to be able to convey to the people what I'm saying about these books. I said, I need someone who is somewhat experienced in Indian philosophy to be able to be my interpreter. I said, it's not going to work any other way. It's going to be, there's no communication. So they said, okay, which was like, unheard of. And Anantashanti was my official interpreter. However, devotees there was Japa and Premavati and Vrindavan Das and Ram Bhakta and, what was his wife's name? Mahamantra. And they were all there, and groups of devotees would come, and they would interact with all these people, all these Soviet visitors to the book fair. And it was driving the KGB nuts, because it's like, well, wait a second, we thought you were the guy, you were the representative, here's your non-official, official interpreter, who are all these other people? I mean, it was like driving them crazy. And I said, well, these people know a little bit about India too, and I've come to become friends with them. So they said, okay. And it was just like, we got away with, stuff that was like unheard of. And it was just, it seemed to have had a very good effect. All these orders were sent on to Bombay. All the people we heard got their books. They reported, because devotees got their names and addresses, and we had a copy of their order form to keep and their phone number, so they were in contact with the people, and they all got their books. They all arrived from Bombay. And I say that, yes, it had an effect, and I think it was a noticeable effect, but we found that even the KGB thought it had a noticeable effect, because the number 2 man in the KGB, Semyon Svigun, wrote an article in the journal Communist, which was the official publication of the Soviet Communist Party, an official publication of the Soviet Communist Party. And he wrote an article, extensive article, some years later. I have a copy of it. And he says, the 3 greatest threats to the Soviet Union were Western culture, pop music, and Hare Krishna. And of course, anybody reading that goes, wow, let me find some Western culture, some pop music, and some Hare Krishna. It just, the forbidden fruit. And he said that and he gave credit, he said that the real opening, the real bursting the doors open of Krishna consciousness of Hare Krishna into the Soviet Union was the 1979 Moscow Book Fair. So both from the officials' negative point of view and from the people who had the opportunity, it appears to have been to have had a very good effect, and to have been a major, if you want to say maybe turning point in things taking place in the Soviet Union.
That was 1 year you did, or you did it more than 1 year?
That was just 1 year, 1979.
What about the next year? Why didn't you do it?
No, I went back for 1980 as well. But that was the major, but 1980, and then I didn't do it after that.
Why?
Because...
Well, we had an incident.
Because it leads to our very exciting adventure. There was something else I think I wanted to say.
I wanted to ask one thing. You mentioned a library.
Oh.
What's this? I didn't...
The what? Library party?
That was in Bombay.
No, in India.
Oh, that's
in India. But an interesting story about, so at the end of the Moscow Book Fair, a couple of days before the end of the Moscow Book Fair, this lady comes over to me, and she's a librarian at the Lenin Library. And she comes up and she's looking at the books, and she introduced herself to me, we're talking, and she said, by the way, what are you going to do with all these books when the book fair is over? Because you either have to take them back with you, or you have to donate them to a Soviet institution. So I said, well, what would you like me to do with these books when the book fair's over? She said, I'd like you to donate them to the Lennon Library. So I said, no problem, that's fine. So the last day of the book fair, I had also brought, I think it was a dozen copies of the big, complete, hardbound Bhagavad Gita. So I had...
In English.
In English. I had kept those in my hotel because I wanted those to go to the devotees. But when I arrived, they made a whole list of all the books that I brought into the country. So I donated all these books. So the lady, last day, the librarian from the Lennon Library came, and she was so excited about being able to get these books. So packed them all up, excuse me, and I guess one of the officials from the book fair made a list of all the books that were being donated to her. So when I left, I had that letter to show proof that I did a legitimate thing and I donated them to the library. But I had these Bhagavad Gitas with me because something happened, I don't remember what, but I wasn't able to have the opportunity to give them to the devotees. So I had them with me in a little suitcase, and Ananta Shanti took me to the airport. So he dropped me off, and I got out of the car. He went over to the cafeteria, to the little cafe, and we made an arrangement. I'm going to go check in, and I'm going to try to come back out, and I'll meet you in the cafeteria, and I'm going to have these books in this carry-on suitcase, and I'll leave them with you. So it was kind of like really watching a television movie, James Bond or something. I went and I checked in, and the man said to me, where are these books? And I said, oh, they're right here in this carry-on bag. I looked, he counted them. And, the man who met me at the airport, Nanta Shanti and I came in the same car. Man met me at the airport, a man from the book fair, because they tried to help you and, make things go smoothly. So he said, you have these books you're supposed to re-export, right? And I said, yes, they're right here. And I opened them up. I said, would you like one? He said, can I have one? I said, yeah, sure, of course. So I gave him a Bhagavad Gita. And, but then I was one short. So when I checked through, I explained, the man said, you're one short. And I said, I only had 11. So I said, well, I gave one to one of the men at the Moscow Book Fair, my representative. He said, oh, okay, that's no problem. So he counted them, he signed off my paper, put it away, and he let me go through. So then I'm watching, and there were like 10 stalls, 10 lines you could go through to exit. So I went through, left a couple of my other carry-on bag, and I carried this bag of books, and he was on this end, and I specifically went to a guy on an end. So I went at the other end, and I went out. So I'd already checked through customs, probably not immigration, just customs. So I checked through customs already. The guy signed me off, put my paper, and I went through the opposite end, and I went back, and the man said, stop, where are you going? I said, I have to go get a cup of tea. I said, I'm really thirsty. He said, okay, go ahead and come right back. So I went and sat down, and Nata Shanti was sitting at a table. I went and sat down, put the bag down, had my cup of tea, talked with him a little bit, and said, okay, see you later. Left the bag there. He picked up the bag first. He picked up the bag first, left the airport, and I watched to make sure, he got in his car and everything, and in a taxi, and he took off. And then I went with bagless and went back through to the man who had seen me go out. No, to the other man, the man who had checked me. And he said, what are you doing? Because he recognized me. I said, oh, I just had to go get a cup of tea. He says, okay, go ahead. So I just went in this one, went out that one, came back in this one, and in the meantime he had, 11 Bhagavad Gitas, which, was a real rare opportunity to get. And, but I found that all those, like the thing at the book fair and the prasadam, and the guy saying you can't do this, and then they letting you, and then the thing with the Nata Shanti, he can't translate for you, well guess what, he is, and the going in, and just all these kind of things that there were, where there's a will, there's a way, where there's seemingly no opportunity, but if you try, these doors and these opportunities opened up, or people's eyes were covered, And it was just phenomenal, the things that you could actually, you know, pull off and get away with.
And great risk.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I mean, 1979 Moscow Book Fair meant I was 27 years old. At 28, you may have been very mature and very sober and very, you know, but at 27, I mean, here I was in Moscow. My wife knew I went to Moscow. I would go out every morning, walking in Vdenha, which is the Park of Economic Achievement, which is where they had the exhibit space for the book fair, and right across on the other side of Vdenha was the Cosmos Hotel, which was a brand spanking new hotel, which was built simply to, the first people it accommodated were the people who came to the 1979 Moscow Book Fair. So it was really beautiful, really fancy, real nice hotel. I'd go walking in this park in the morning, and the only people in the park were the ladies trimming the rose bushes, so that when a rose kind of like deadheaded and all the petals fell off, they would pick up all the petals, they would cut off the dead head, and this park was so manicured, it was incredible. But I would think to myself sometimes that I was nuts. Here I am in the middle of Moscow, you know, doing this stuff during the day with the book fair and Prabhupada's books, and the KGB obviously watching, knowing what's going on. And I'm out here walking alone. I could have gotten picked up, you know, oh, David Yakubko, he never arrived. He checked in at the airport and we haven't seen him since. Oh, he left his hotel yesterday morning and we don't know where he is. I mean, you know, being American, you see spy movies and this, and of course told all the things that you hear since you're a little kid, hiding under your desk or in a closet in school, that the Russians are going to, the Soviets are going to bomb the school. I mean, anything could have happened, but just somehow or other, I think that whether it was dependence on Krishna and Prabhupada, whether it's youthful foolishness and enthusiasm, but somehow or other, I mean, we did these things which were, you know, I mean, pretty crazy at times, like this story. I mean, you know, in East Germany with a van full of books.
Would you go to Baghdad now and try to distribute?
When I go to Baghdad, no, but I'm sending books to American soldiers in Baghdad and Afghanistan. But that's the closest I'm going to get.
You were onto it after that book fair that we were talking about. He did the next year, but
No,
Oh, I wanted to say one thing. That we managed to print, and I have to tell a story about the translator. That's an interesting story. We managed to print, I think it was something like 50,000 copies of Bhagavad Gita, Russian Bhagavad Gita, in a very small edition. I think we printed 50,000 copies of the Krishna book, all 3 volumes in a little edition, thick, but all 3 volumes in a little edition. So many and it was printed in Bombay. It was printed in Germany, I guess, and everything connected with that. At one point, I found out that the printer in Germany had, what do they call those things? Signatures. You know, the little sections, which when you print on a big sheet, then the folder folds them up, and then it gathers together all these sections to make a complete book. So they had extra signatures. I think actually we ordered the preface and the introduction to the Russian Bhagavad Gita, we ordered like 10,000 extra copies of that first signature, that introduction. And what I would do is I would get, before I tell that, so we ordered those. So we printed this fabulous amount of books, probably 250,000 books in the West, between Bhagavad Gita, Sri Upanishad, and Krishna book. And that was, and everything connected with the pre-press work. My son and I, when he was probably 6 years old, we went to New York, came to New York, and to buy for the BBT in Sweden that was working on Russian, Polish, Czech translations. The computer of the day, Toshiba T1000s, which were like this. I mean, you probably might remember the specs. I mean, this tiny little computer with one floppy disk drive, I think. Maybe it was a hard disk drive. No, floppy.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were like the simplest. I mean, you know, like an infant wouldn't use it today. And this is what the BBT was working on. So the buying of computers, the getting of people, the providing for these people, all the pre-press work, the printing of the books, everything, all the expenses in distributing these books through the most insane channels you could imagine. My and my family's maintenance, my travel to India, to, you know, all over, you know, Europe, to was all arranged for by,
Yeah, but
hang on, I'm not done talking yet. Was arranged for through the coordinated efforts of the gentleman to my left. It was, I mean, it was, you may know, I don't know, I almost had, sometimes to his dismay, almost like a carte blanche to spend whatever was necessary to get this going on. We established the Committee to Free Soviet Hare Krishnas. I mean, all the expense involved in that, in printing postcards, in printing brochures, in traveling and in press conferences and all these kind of things were all arranged, were all paid for by the BBT, by BBT funds, through arrangements and calculations of my dear friend from New York, from long, long, long ago, who was just, I mean, I had an instruction from Srila Prabhupada that I had no idea how in the world, I mean, besides, you know, thinking, planning, executing, I mean, I had no idea how in the world it would ever take place. And it never would have been able to happen if it wasn't for his support, encouragement, financial support, and being, as he said, you know, a comrade in ideas, a comrade in spirit to just make this happen. And I mean, there are stories that we could go on and on and on about the Soviet devotees coming to India for the first time, about how much was collected for them, about, you know, they were in prison a couple of them were in prison 2 weeks before, 2 weeks later they're on a plane going to India on a all expense paid pilgrimage. I mean, just unbelievable things happened. And none of this stuff really, I mean, would have happened, or I don't know how would have happened if he didn't make these arrangements.
Practically speaking, all the money was actually made by the music I was making. That was the reason I was making all these records, because all of the money we were making from the records was paying for all this enormous expense, which we got nothing back from. You know, like when you make a book and you sell a book in the West, yeah, you make like the formula the BBT gets, but everything we did there was all free. All this stuff was free, so we were doing these records, which were just making enormous profit, and all that profit was used for this program. So even though some people may have wondered why are we distributing music and why not books, and I would tell them because we need a lot of money to pay for all this stuff. I didn't, of course, never told anybody the details because I didn't want to make any waves, but that's how it was done. But you know, the funny thing about the books, we got to tell about how we got the translations, because at one point we realized we needed better translators because, you know, starting with the Bhagavad Gita, it had to be properly translated.
Because we had one that was smuggled out, was actually
let me explain it.
by courier somehow.
Yeah, but it was
we
a
got
microfilm. It was microfilm. They had, you see, at this time, Sannyas and Kamalamala and Yamaraj and
Brahmananda.
who?
Brahmananda? Not yet.
Not yet. And they were working with the people in Moscow and everything. Premavati and her crew. They had managed to start getting the whole idea about publishing books there in Russia. So they had made this translation. Good grief! Those were, for the camera's sake, a bunch of pearl lozenges coming flying by the cameraman. So they had made this arrangement to learn how to translate, and they were constantly I was getting these very strange cryptic letters that were coming by people who were taking boats. They had managed to somehow make cooperation with people who were traveling from Russia to the West for some other reason, some official reason or something, and they were getting us letters, they were getting us things which we needed, and they needed to get answers to. So I was telling them about the terms they had to use to translate, what these terms actually meant, how they were supposed to find words from them, from my experience of working with other Eastern European languages. So we worked out the whole vocabulary of the thing. And then they were translating the books, and they were microfilming their translations, which were all handwritten. So they were handwriting these translations, and they were microfilming them. And we would get just a little, like a film cam of the microfilm of the Bhagavad Gita. And I don't remember who brought it out, but one day we received this little microfilm of the Bhagavad Gita, and that's how we printed the little one, and we made later on the big ones. But unbeknownst to us at the time, they started a printing press in Armenia. And they had arranged, if you had spoken with, I don't know if they cooperated with this, they arranged everything with the printing, they arranged everything with the collation, they were collating in apartments at great risk, and when they finally made all the books, with great risk, they brought them on the train. Did you ever hear the story of the train? It was the most insane trip. Here they are with all of these collated books on this train from Yerevan to Moscow, and they're being checked over and over and over again. And they were doing the most insane things to deviate the conductors and the customs guys and the police and everything. They would be making incredible parties. They would just all of a sudden create a party, and they were inviting her. They had all this vodka and everything they were giving to all these people. Or they were making, like, somebody got sick and laying on the floor. Another time a guy came. Every time somebody came by, there was some catastrophe that happened on the train to deviate their attention away from this. They had where the luggage was. This whole thing was filled with burlap bags, filled with Bhagavad Gitas. So they were in great risk, but they were making this cacophony the entire time. And we once had a dinner in St. Petersburg where everybody who was involved in this was sitting around. They told this story in such a funny way. I really hope you got this. It was hysterical. We were rolling on the floor with the tricks they were using and the way they were deviating these people. And so that's how we were getting the books out, by microfilm, and then we were working together like that. We had this back and forth communication through little pieces of microfilmed information going back, or little pieces of letters on, and maybe send a jar or something with on the inside of the label, written messages, and just insane. Any insane thing you could think of, we were doing to get messages back and forth to produce these books. And those little books, I remember them. We still have one. I have one at home. These little tiny Bhagavad Gitas. They're really a masterpiece. I mean, they look really cool. Little tiny little books. You can't read. You got to have a magnifying glass to read anything. But they were they were sent everywhere. He used to go to. This guy is such a fanatic. He used to be out on the trucks in the freezing cold in Sweden when you get frostbite and stuff. He's out there waving down trucks, giving these books everywhere, to all the containers all over Stockholm and everywhere. It was just madness what we were doing. And everything seemed to be going great until something happened.
We're not ready to tell that, though.
Okay, we're not ready to tell
that. Actually, I guess we could tell, because that thing that happened, I think that's what made me more of a fanatic, or more dedicated, or more determined, because it was like, well, if I can't be there, I got to do my damnedest outside of there to do whatever I can to effectively do something, to have an effect in there if I can't be there myself. So then I guess that thing happened.
I got to tell this story because I just have so much fun telling it. I mean, you can add things if you want, but
I just want to tell you that we're going to, in about 4 minutes, have to change it. 3 minutes, have to change a tape.
Better change it now.
Let me tell something, that this was in this period between 1981 and 1991, which he will tell you why that 10-year period existed. I had said something about getting these little signatures of the introduction and preface to Bhagavad Gita. I got a list from a guy, Valery Kuharitz, a Russian man who I met in New York and subsequently moved to Paris. He gave me a list of a couple thousand Soviet organizations throughout the entire Soviet Union. So I had a crew in Sweden, including Gurukula kids, we did two things. we took Bhagavad Gitas and we packaged them some in 2 in a package, some 4 in a package, some 6 in a package. And the Gurukula kids would wrap them all up, pack them all up. We do different kind of paper, different kind of handwriting, different kind of stamps. And we sent out, I think it was something like 2,000 Bhagavad Gitas, the complete book, to different institutions, libraries, organizations, institutions. And then what we did is we packed up something like 10,000 envelopes, different colors, different sizes, airmail, non-airmail, different handwriting, different stamps. And we put these signatures in there and we shipped them out from all different parts of Europe. We sent some to England, we took some to England, we took some to Denmark, to Paris, to Switzerland, I think, and from Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Denmark. And we sent these in to these mailing lists that we had. So just to kind of whet their appetite and to give them a little taste of Bhagavad Gita and of Krishna consciousness. And then we had a post office box in Stockholm, and the name of this organization was sending to respond to was Vedic Classics. We got hundreds and thousands of letters back asking for more books, asking for more information as a result of these being mailed in.
And the Soviet authorities didn't sanction it?
It was too much from too many different places. They all looked different.
It
It
was
was
a
going
massive
all over the country.
Flooding. It was
They
like
couldn't.
old days spam. We did spam before anybody ever could figure out what spam was. We did snail mail spam.
There was no way they could figure out
There was
what
no way they could
no
handle
way
it.
to
They
stop
were
it.
flooded.
Because a lot of mail goes in and out of the Soviet Union.
And it all had different envelopes, different names, different...
So there's no way they,
no way they could figure it out.
of course, some they must have stopped, but,
Sure,
but you know, the vast majority got through. And we just used, it was amazing. We just met so many people, and everybody had their little niche, or their little specialty, or their little group of contacts. And we used them all, and it just all added up to be a big snowball effect of all these different avenues we were using. I remember one time we had a meeting, I think, in Switzerland, in Zurich, and I heard on the radio, because I always used to listen to the BBC and the Voice of America in Europe, and I heard that there was a conference in Geneva, somewhere else in Switzerland, and I think it was called an astronautical conference. So I said, oh my goodness, there's going to be astronauts.